I still remember the exact moment my entire world collapsed. It was a Tuesday in late October, and I was sitting in my home office in Boston, staring at a spreadsheet that made absolutely no sense. The numbers were wrong. Not just wrong, but deliberately, impossibly wrong in a way that suggested someone had spent years constructing an elaborate fiction. I had been divorced from Vanessa for almost 18 months at that point, and I thought the worst was behind me. I thought the betrayal I had already experienced was the full extent of what she was capable of. I had no idea that the woman I had loved, married, and shared 5 years of my life with had been hiding something so enormous, so catastrophic, that when the truth finally came out, it would destroy dozens of lives and send shockwaves through the entire financial industry. But I need to take you back to the beginning. I need you to understand who I was before all of this happened, and who Vanessa was, or at least who I believed her to be. Because the person I married and the person she actually was turned out to be two completely different people, and recognizing that difference nearly cost me everything. I met Vanessa Cole at a charity gala in Manhattan in the spring of 2016. I was 30 years old, recently promoted to senior accountant at a mid-sized firm that handled corporate audits, and I was only at the gala because my boss had insisted I go in his place. He had come down with the flu, and he said it would be good for my career to make some connections. I remember feeling completely out of place among all those wealthy donors in their designer clothes and expensive jewelry. I was wearing a rented tuxedo and nursing a glass of champagne that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. And then I saw her. Vanessa was standing near the silent auction table, laughing at something someone had said, and she was absolutely radiant. She had this dark auburn hair that fell in waves past her shoulders, and these striking green eyes that seemed to catch every light in the room. She was wearing a simple black dress that somehow looked more elegant than anything else I had seen that night. When she caught me looking at her, she smiled, and I felt my heart actually skip a beat. It sounds cliché, I know, but that is exactly what happened. She walked over to me, introduced herself, and within minutes, we were deep in conversation. She worked in finance, she said, at a boutique investment firm that handled high-net-worth clients. She was smart, witty, and genuinely interested in what I had to say. When I told her I was an accountant, she did not make the usual jokes about spreadsheets and tax returns. Instead, she asked thoughtful questions about my work, about what I loved about numbers and financial analysis. She seemed fascinated by the fact that I could look at a balance sheet and see the story behind it, the decisions and the mistakes and the hidden truths that numbers always reveal if you know how to read them. We exchanged numbers that night, and our first date was 3 days later. Within 6 months, we were inseparable. Within a year, I proposed. We married in the fall of 2017, a small ceremony at a historic hotel in Newport, Rhode Island, with about 50 guests. Her parents were there, wealthy old money types from Connecticut who seemed to approve of me well enough, even if I could tell they thought their daughter was marrying beneath her station. My brother Derek was my best man, and I remember him pulling me aside before the ceremony and telling me he was happy for me, but that something about Vanessa felt a little too perfect. I laughed it off at the time. Derek had always been the suspicious one, the protective older brother who questioned everything and everyone. I told him he was being paranoid. I told him I had finally found the love of my life. I wish I had listened to him. The first few years of our marriage were genuinely happy, or at least I believed they were. Vanessa was successful at her job, earning promotions and bonuses that dwarfed my own salary. I did not mind. I was proud of her. She worked long hours, traveled frequently for client meetings, and sometimes came home so exhausted she would fall asleep on the couch before dinner. I took care of things at home, cooking and cleaning and managing our finances, which she was always grateful for. She said she loved that I was so dependable, so steady. She said I was her anchor. Looking back now, I can see the signs I missed. The way she would sometimes get phone calls late at night and step into another room to take them. The way she would occasionally come home smelling faintly of cigarette smoke, even though she did not smoke. The way her stories about work sometimes had small inconsistencies that she would brush off if I noticed them. But I was in love, And I trusted her completely, and I had no reason to believe that the woman I had married was leading a double life. The first real crack in our relationship appeared in the summer of 2019. Vanessa had been working on what she called a major deal, something involving a large institutional client that required her to travel to New York every week. She was stressed and irritable, snapping at me over small things, coming home later and later. I tried to be supportive, but one night I suggested that maybe she was taking on too much, that maybe she should consider stepping back from some of her responsibilities. She turned on me with a fury I had never seen before. She said I did not understand the pressure she was under, that I could never understand what it meant to operate at her level. She said my little accounting job was nothing compared to what she did, that I should be grateful she even bothered to come home at all. I was stunned. Vanessa had never spoken to me like that before. She apologized the next morning, said she was just exhausted and did not mean any of it, and I forgave her because that is what you do when you love someone. But things did not get better. They got worse. By the fall of 2019, Vanessa was spending more time away than she was at home. She had a new intensity about her, a sharpness in her eyes that had not been there before. When I asked about her work, she gave me vague answers and changed the subject. When I suggested we take a vacation, just the two of us, she said she could not possibly get away. When I tried to plan a romantic dinner for our second anniversary, she canceled at the last minute because something came up at the office. I started to feel like I was living with a stranger. The woman I had married, the warm and loving and attentive partner I had fallen in love with, seemed to have vanished. In her place was someone cold and distant, someone who looked through me rather than at me. I began to wonder if she was having an affair. In February of 2020, just before the world shut down for the pandemic, I found out the truth, or at least the truth I thought I had found. I had come home early from work one afternoon, feeling sick with what I thought was the beginning of a cold. Vanessa was supposed to be in New York, but when I walked into our apartment, I heard voices coming from the bedroom. I froze in the hallway, my heart pounding, and then I heard a man's voice, low and intimate. I pushed open the bedroom door, and there she was, sitting on the edge of the bed with her phone pressed to her ear, talking to someone in a tone I had never heard her use with me. She looked up when I came in, and for just a moment, I saw panic flash across her face. Then she composed herself, ended the call abruptly, and asked me what I was doing home. I asked her who she had been talking to. She said it was just a colleague, nothing important. I said it did not sound like a colleague. She said I was being paranoid. We fought that night, really fought for the first time in our marriage. She accused me of not trusting her. I accused her of hiding something. She said I was smothering her with my neediness. I said I barely saw her anymore. By the end of the night, we were sleeping in separate rooms, and something had broken between us that I knew might never be repaired. The pandemic hit a few weeks later, and suddenly we were trapped in our apartment together with nowhere to go and nothing to distract us from the growing chasm in our marriage. Vanessa set up a home office in our spare bedroom and spent entire days behind a locked door, taking calls and typing furiously on her laptop. I tried to give her space, tried to be understanding about the pressure she was under, but the distance between us only grew wider. It was during one of those long, lonely days of lockdown that I made a discovery that would eventually lead me down the rabbit hole. Vanessa had left her laptop open on the kitchen counter while she was in the shower, and a notification popped up on the screen. It was an email from someone named Rick Davenport, and the subject line read, Phase 3, Final Transfers. I knew I should not have looked. I knew it was a violation of her privacy, but something in my gut told me that I needed to see what was in that email. What I found made no sense to me at the time. The email was full of numbers and financial jargon, references to offshore accounts and shell companies and something called the Phoenix Protocol. There were instructions about moving funds, covering tracks, maintaining plausible deniability. It read like something out of a crime novel, not a legitimate business communication. I took a photo of the email with my phone before I heard the shower turn off, and I quickly closed the laptop and pretended to be making coffee when Vanessa came into the kitchen. I did not confront her about what I had seen. I was not sure what it meant, and some part of me still wanted to believe there was an innocent explanation. Maybe it was some kind of specialized investment strategy. Maybe I was misunderstanding the terminology. Maybe I was just looking for reasons to distrust her because our marriage was falling apart. But I could not stop thinking about that email. Over the following weeks, I started paying closer attention to Vanessa's behavior, her phone calls, her schedule, the fragments of conversation I overheard. I started researching Richard Davenport, and what I found was both impressive and unsettling. He was the CEO of Davenport Capital Management, a hedge fund based in New York with assets under management in the billions. He was politically connected, a major donor to both parties, a regular fixture at exclusive events. He was also known for his aggressive investment strategies and his ability to generate returns that consistently outperformed the market. Some financial journalists had questioned how he achieved such consistent results, but no one had ever been able to prove anything improper. I did not know it then, but I was looking at the man who would eventually destroy my marriage, my reputation, and very nearly my freedom. In the summer of 2020, with the pandemic still raging and our marriage on life support, I made a decision. I went to see my brother Derek. Derek had left the military a few years earlier and had started his own cybersecurity consulting firm. He was brilliant with computers, had the kind of technical skills that bordered on wizardry, and more importantly, he was the one person in the world I trusted completely. I told him everything. I told him about the changes in Vanessa, the mysterious phone calls, the email I had photographed, my suspicions that something was very wrong. He listened without interrupting, and when I was finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he said, "Marcus, I think you need to be very careful here. If what you're describing is what I think it is, you could be looking at something much bigger than an affair. You could be looking at something that could put you in serious danger." I asked him what he meant. He said the terminology in that email, the references to offshore accounts and shell companies and phases and protocols, sounded like the language of financial fraud. Large-scale financial fraud. The kind that brought down companies and sent people to prison for decades. He said if Vanessa was involved in something like that, and if the people she was working with found out that I knew, my life could be at risk. I felt the blood drain from my face. I had suspected that Vanessa was hiding something, maybe an affair or some other personal secret. I had not considered the possibility that she might be involved in criminal activity, that she might be laundering money or perpetrating fraud on a massive scale, that the woman I had married might be a criminal. Derek offered to help me investigate, quietly and carefully, without tipping off Vanessa or anyone else. He said we needed to understand what we were dealing with before we decided what to do. I agreed, and that night, while Vanessa slept, Derek and I began the slow and painstaking work of uncovering the truth. It took months. Derek was meticulous, building a picture piece by piece from public records, financial filings, and the fragments of information I was able to gather. What we found was staggering in its scope and its audacity. Davenport Capital Management was running a massive Ponzi scheme. For over a decade, Richard Davenport had been taking money from investors, promising extraordinary returns, and using new investments to pay off old ones while siphoning billions into a network of offshore accounts. The scheme was incredibly sophisticated, with multiple layers of shell companies and fake transactions designed to fool auditors and regulators. And right at the center of it all, helping to manage the flow of money and keep the books looking legitimate, was my wife. Vanessa was not just an employee at Davenport Capital. She was one of his key lieutenants, a trusted member of his inner circle who had been with him since the beginning. Her entire career, the job she had told me about when we first met, the promotions and bonuses and long hours, had all been in service of this massive fraud. Everything she had told me about her work was a lie. I felt sick when I realized the full scope of it. The woman I had loved, the woman I had built a life with, had been deceiving me from the very beginning. She had used our marriage as cover, as a facade of normalcy that made her seem less suspicious. She had slept beside me every night while helping to steal billions of dollars from innocent people. I wanted to confront her immediately. I wanted to scream at her, to demand answers, to make her explain how she could have done this to me and to all those people whose money she had helped steal. But Derek talked me down. He said we did not have enough evidence yet, and that if we tipped our hand too soon, Davenport and his people would destroy everything and disappear. He said we needed to be patient, to gather more information, and to figure out a way to bring them down without getting ourselves killed in the process. So I waited, and I watched, and I pretended that everything was normal even as my world crumbled around me. In the fall of 2020, Vanessa asked me for a divorce. She said she had been unhappy for a long time, that we had grown apart, that she needed to focus on her career. She was calm and businesslike about it, as if she were ending a professional partnership rather than a marriage. I agreed without protest. I could not tell her what I knew, and I could not stomach the idea of continuing to live with her, knowing what she was. The divorce was finalized in early 2021, and Vanessa moved to New York to be closer to her work. She took almost everything, leaving me with our apartment in Boston and a generous alimony payment that I suspected was designed to keep me quiet and compliant. I should have walked away then. I should have taken my freedom and my settlement and tried to rebuild my life. But I could not let it go. I could not stop thinking about all those investors, all those ordinary people who had trusted Davenport with their savings and their retirement funds and their children's college money. I could not stop thinking about the fact that Vanessa had helped steal their futures and that she was going to get away with it. Derek and I continued our investigation, but we hit wall after wall. Davenport's operation was too well protected, too carefully constructed to leave obvious trails. We had suspicions and circumstantial evidence, but nothing that would hold up in court or convince regulators to take action. I was starting to lose hope that we would ever be able to expose the truth. And then, in the spring of 2022, I got the break I had been praying for. It came in the form of an old friend, someone I had not spoken to in years. His name was Thomas Chen, and we had been colleagues at my first accounting job out of college. Thomas had gone on to work for the Securities and Exchange Commission, eventually rising to become a senior investigator in their enforcement division. He reached out to me out of the blue, said he had heard through the grapevine that I had been asking questions about Davenport Capital and asked if we could meet. We met at a coffee shop in downtown Boston, and Thomas looked nervous, checking over his shoulder before he sat down. He told me that the SEC had been investigating Davenport for years, but that every time they got close to something, evidence would disappear, or witnesses would recant, or the investigation would be shut down from above. He said there were rumors that Davenport had powerful protectors, people in government and law enforcement who were on his payroll. He said he believed the scheme was even bigger than anyone realized, and that he was convinced there was someone inside the SEC feeding information to Davenport. I asked him why he was telling me this. He said because he knew I was a good man, and because he knew I had been married to Vanessa Cole, and because he believed I might have access to information that could help bring the whole thing down. He said he was putting his career and possibly his life on the line by talking to me, but that he could not stand by and watch any longer. I told him everything. I showed him the evidence Derek and I had gathered. He looked through it with growing amazement, and when he was finished, he said it was exactly what he had been looking for. He said with this information, combined with what the SEC already had, they might finally be able to build a case that would stick. But he said they would need more. They would need documents from inside Davenport Capital, records of the shell companies and the offshore transfers and the fake transactions. Without those internal documents, the case would be purely circumstantial. I knew where those documents were. I knew because Vanessa had kept copies on a personal hard drive that she stored in a safety deposit box. She had told me about it once, years ago, saying it was her insurance policy in case anything ever went wrong. I had not understood what she meant at the time, but now it was crystal clear. She had evidence that could incriminate everyone involved in the scheme, and she was keeping it as leverage. The problem was that the safety deposit box was in a bank in Manhattan, and I had no legal way to access it. It was in Vanessa's name only, and our divorce had been finalized for over a year. I could not just walk in and demand they hand over the contents, but I had an idea. A desperate, risky, probably foolish idea that could land me in prison if it went wrong. But I was past caring about the consequences. I had been living with this weight for too long, knowing what Vanessa had done and being powerless to stop it. I was willing to risk everything to bring her down. The plan took months to prepare. Derek used his contacts to create a set of documents that would allow me to access the safety deposit box as Vanessa's representative, claiming that she had given me power of attorney for financial matters. It was forgery and it was illegal, and if we got caught, we would both go to prison. But we were careful. We studied the bank's procedures, we timed our visit for a day when the regular staff would be minimal, and we hoped that the documents would pass scrutiny. In September of 2022, I walked into the Manhattan Savings and Trust on Fifth Avenue, my heart pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. I presented the documents to the clerk, explained that I was there on behalf of my former wife to retrieve the contents of her safety deposit box. The clerk looked at the papers, looked at me, and for one terrible moment, I was certain she was going to call security. But then she smiled, asked me to sign the log, and led me to the vault. Inside the safety deposit box was a single external hard drive. I took it and walked out of the bank, somehow managing not to run. Derek was waiting in a car around the corner, and as soon as I got in, we drove straight to Thomas Chen's apartment. We spent the entire night going through the files on that hard drive, and what we found was beyond anything we had imagined. There were years of financial records, meticulously organized and clearly labeled. There were emails between Davenport and his inner circle, discussing the scheme in explicit detail. There were lists of politicians and regulators who had received payments, some of whom were still in office. There were records of offshore accounts holding billions of dollars, with instructions for how to access them. And there was a document, dated just a few months earlier, that outlined a plan to liquidate the entire operation and disappear to a country with no extradition treaty. They were getting ready to run. All of them, including Vanessa. Thomas was overwhelmed by what we had found. He said it was the most comprehensive evidence of financial fraud he had ever seen, and that it implicated people at the highest levels of government and finance. He said he needed to move carefully to make sure the case was handled by prosecutors and agents who were not compromised. He said it could take months to build the case properly, but that when it was ready, it would bring down everyone involved. I asked him what would happen to me. He was quiet for a moment, then said that technically I had committed crimes to obtain this evidence, and that a skilled defense attorney could potentially use that to get the case dismissed. But he said he would do everything in his power to protect me, to present me as a whistleblower rather than a criminal. He could not make any promises, but he said he believed justice would ultimately prevail. I went home that night and could not sleep. I kept thinking about Vanessa, about the woman I had loved and trusted, about the life we had built together. I thought about all the times she had lied to me, all the moments I had ignored my instincts because I did not want to believe the truth. I thought about the investors whose money she had helped steal, the families whose lives had been ruined, the retirement funds that had evaporated. And I thought about what would happen to her when the truth came out. Part of me still loved her, some stupid, stubborn part of my heart that could not let go of the person I thought she had been. But that part was getting smaller every day, and in its place was something cold and hard and determined. She had betrayed me. She had used me. She had made me an unwitting accomplice to the greatest financial fraud in American history. And now she was going to pay for it. The months that followed were the most stressful of my life. I tried to maintain a normal routine, going to work, seeing friends, pretending that everything was fine. But I was constantly on edge, terrified that Davenport would find out what we had done, that Vanessa would somehow discover that her insurance policy was missing, that the whole thing would fall apart before justice could be served. Derek was invaluable during this time. He kept watch, monitoring communications and activities, looking for any sign that we had been discovered. He also helped me prepare for what was coming, making sure I had legal representation and that I understood the risks I was facing. He never once suggested that I should have walked away, that I should have protected myself instead of pursuing the truth. He said he was proud of me, and that our parents would have been proud too. Thomas Chen worked tirelessly to build the case. He brought in a small team of trusted colleagues, people he knew were not on Davenport's payroll, and they spent months verifying the evidence and building an airtight prosecution. He also reached out to the Department of Justice, coordinating with federal prosecutors who had been waiting for an opportunity to take down Davenport for years. In the spring of 2023, everything was finally ready. The operation was coordinated with military precision. On a Tuesday morning in April, federal agents simultaneously executed search warrants at Davenport Capital's offices in New York, Richard Davenport's homes in Manhattan and the Hamptons, and the residences of 17 key employees and associates. Among those arrested that morning was Vanessa Cole Thompson, my ex-wife, who was taken into custody at her apartment on the Upper East Side. I was not there for the arrests. Thomas had advised me to stay away, to let the professionals handle it. But I watched the news coverage from my apartment in Boston, and I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and sorrow as I saw Vanessa being led out of her building in handcuffs, her face blank with shock, surrounded by cameras and reporters. The story dominated the news for weeks. The scale of the fraud was almost incomprehensible, ultimately tallied at just over $6 billion stolen from investors over a period of 15 years. The victims included pension funds, university endowments, charitable foundations, and thousands of individual investors who had trusted Davenport with their life savings. Many of them had lost everything. The evidence from Vanessa's hard drive proved to be devastating. It implicated not just Davenport and his employees, but also a sitting congressman, 2 SEC officials, a federal judge, and numerous financial advisors and lawyers who had helped facilitate the scheme. The prosecutions rippled outward like waves from a stone dropped in water, bringing down dozens of people who had thought they were untouchable. As for me, my role in obtaining the evidence became known almost immediately. The defense attorneys, desperate to find any way to discredit the case, argued that I had obtained the hard drive illegally and that everything on it should be inadmissible. There were tense weeks when it seemed like the entire prosecution might collapse. But Thomas and the federal prosecutors had prepared for this. They argued that I had acted in good faith as a whistleblower, that the evidence would have been discovered eventually through other means, and that the public interest in exposing the fraud outweighed the technical illegality of how the evidence was obtained. The judge ultimately agreed, ruling that the evidence was admissible and that I would not face prosecution for my role in obtaining it. I still had to testify, though. I had to sit in a courtroom and face Vanessa, look her in the eye, and tell the world about her crimes. It was one of the hardest things I have ever done. The trial lasted for 6 months. The evidence was overwhelming, and Davenport's attorneys knew it. They tried every trick in the book, attacking the credibility of witnesses, questioning the authenticity of documents, claiming that their clients had been manipulated or coerced. None of it worked. The jury saw through the lies, just as I had eventually seen through Vanessa's. When I took the stand, Vanessa stared at me with an expression I could not read. Anger, betrayal, hatred, maybe all of those things. Her attorney tried to paint me as a bitter ex-husband seeking revenge, someone who had fabricated evidence to punish the woman who had left him. But I stayed calm. I answered every question honestly and directly. I told the jury about our marriage, about my growing suspicions, about the email I had discovered, and the investigation Derek and I had conducted. I told them about finding the hard drive and turning it over to the authorities. I told them the truth. When the defense attorney asked me why I had gone to such lengths to expose my ex-wife, I gave him the only answer I had. Because it was the right thing to do, I said. Because innocent people were being hurt, and I could not stand by and let it continue. Because the woman I married turned out to be a criminal, and criminals need to face justice. Vanessa's expression did not change, but I saw something flicker in her eyes. For just a moment, she looked like the woman I had fallen in love with all those years ago, the charming, intelligent, beautiful woman who had swept me off my feet at a charity gala. And then the moment passed, and she was a stranger again. The verdict came on a cold November morning. Richard Davenport was found guilty on all counts, including securities fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. He was sentenced to 150 years in federal prison, effectively a life sentence for the 63-year-old. He showed no emotion as the sentence was read, but I heard later that he collapsed in his cell that night, suffering a heart attack from which he would never fully recover. Vanessa was found guilty on 27 counts, including securities fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Her defense had tried to portray her as a victim, someone who had been manipulated by Davenport and did not understand the true nature of what she was doing. The jury did not buy it. The evidence clearly showed that she had been a knowing and willing participant from the beginning, and that she had profited enormously from the scheme. She was sentenced to 45 years in federal prison. I was in the courtroom when the sentence was read. Vanessa looked at me one last time before she was led away, and in that look I saw everything she had never said. The resentment, the blame, the absolute refusal to accept responsibility for what she had done. In her mind, I was the villain. I was the one who had destroyed her life by exposing her crimes. She would never understand that she had destroyed herself the moment she chose to become part of Davenport's scheme. The aftermath of the trial was almost as difficult as the trial itself. I was hailed as a hero by some, vilified as a traitor by others. Vanessa's family refused to speak to me, blaming me for her downfall. Some of our mutual friends took her side, saying I should have looked the other way or handled things privately. Others praised my courage and said I had done a public service. The truth is, I did not feel like a hero. I felt exhausted and hollowed out, like I had given everything I had and there was nothing left. I had lost my wife, my marriage, my sense of security, and my belief that I could trust my own judgment about people. I had also spent almost 3 years of my life focused on this one goal, and now that it was accomplished, I did not know what to do with myself. I took some time away from everything. I used part of the settlement money from the divorce to buy a small house on the coast of Maine, far from the noise and chaos of the city. I spent my days walking on the beach, reading, trying to remember who I had been before all of this started. Derek visited when he could, and we talked about the future, about what came next. He said I should write a book about my experience, that people needed to know how these schemes worked and how ordinary people could help expose them. I told him I would think about it. The healing took years. I went to therapy, worked through my anger and my grief and my lingering feelings for the woman who had deceived me. I learned to trust myself again, to believe in my own instincts and judgment. I started a new career as a forensic accountant, using my skills to help investigators uncover financial crimes. It felt right, like I was turning my pain into something useful. And slowly, gradually, I began to find peace. The last time I saw Vanessa was about 2 years after her conviction. She had been transferred to a minimum security facility in West Virginia, and she had written me a letter asking me to visit. I do not know why I agreed. Maybe I needed closure. Maybe I wanted to see if she had changed. Maybe some foolish part of me still hoped for an apology. The visit was brief and unsatisfying. Vanessa looked older, worn down by prison life, but her eyes still had that sharp, calculating quality I remembered. She told me she understood why I had done what I did, that she did not blame me for her situation. She said she had made mistakes and was paying for them. She said she hoped I could find happiness. I did not believe a word of it. Everything she said felt rehearsed, calculated, like she was playing a role for an audience. She had been pretending her entire life, And she was still pretending now. The only difference was that her stage had shrunk from Manhattan penthouses to a prison visiting room. When the visit was over, I stood up to leave, and she asked me one final question. "Do you ever think about what we had?" she asked. "About the good times before everything went wrong?" I looked at her, at this woman I had once loved more than anything in the world, and I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no longing. Just a vast empty space where those feelings used to be. "What we had was a lie," I said. "Everything about our marriage was built on deception. I do not think about it anymore because there is nothing real to think about. You were never the person I thought you were, and I have finally accepted that." She did not respond. She just looked at me with those green eyes, and for a moment I thought I saw something crack behind her carefully constructed facade. But then it was gone, and she was back to being the cold, calculating stranger I had come to know. I walked out of that prison and never looked back. Looking back now, I can see how much I have changed since that night at the charity gala when I first met Vanessa. I was naive then, trusting and optimistic and believing that love could conquer anything. I have learned since then that some people are not capable of love, that they use it as a tool to manipulate others. I have learned that the people closest to us can hide the darkest secrets, and that seeing the truth requires courage and sometimes sacrifice. I have also learned that justice is possible, even when it seems hopeless. The system is flawed, and powerful people often escape accountability, but not always. Sometimes, if you are willing to fight hard enough and long enough, the truth wins out. The evidence I helped uncover led to the recovery of nearly $4 billion, most of which was returned to the victims of the fraud. It did not undo the damage that had been done, but it was something. It was a start. My brother Derek tells me I should be proud of what I accomplished. He says I took down one of the biggest financial criminals in American history and helped bring justice to thousands of victims. He says I showed that ordinary people can make a difference when they choose to stand up for what is right. I suppose he is correct, but pride is not what I feel most of the time. What I feel is a quiet sense of resolution, a knowledge that I did what I could with the circumstances I was given. I did not choose to become a whistleblower, or an investigator, or a crusader for justice. I just wanted to understand why the woman I loved had changed, and in seeking that understanding, I uncovered something much larger than myself. The revenge, if you can call it that, was never really about making Vanessa suffer. It was about refusing to be complicit in her crimes, about refusing to let her get away with what she had done. It was about choosing truth over comfortable lies, even when the truth was painful and the consequences were uncertain. In that sense, I suppose I did get my revenge. Not through anger or hatred or violence, but through the simple, powerful act of exposing the truth. Vanessa will spend most of the rest of her life in prison. Richard Davenport died in custody 2 years after his conviction, his health destroyed by the stress of his downfall. The politicians and regulators who helped them are facing their own prosecutions, their careers and reputations in ruins. The scheme that stole $6 billion from innocent people has been exposed for the world to see, and the people responsible are finally paying the price. And I am here, living my quiet life on the coast of Maine, doing work I believe in, slowly rebuilding the trust in myself and others that Vanessa destroyed. I am not the same person I was before any of this happened. I am harder now, more cautious, less willing to take things at face value. But I am also stronger. I have survived the worst betrayal imaginable and come out the other side with my integrity intact. That is worth something. That is worth everything. If there is a lesson in my story, it is this. The people we love can hurt us in ways we never imagined, and sometimes the greatest courage is simply being willing to see the truth. It would have been easier for me to look the other way, to accept my divorce settlement and move on with my life, to pretend I did not know what Vanessa had done. But I could not do that. I could not live with myself knowing that I had the power to stop a terrible injustice and chose not to use it. The truth has a way of coming out eventually, Secrets cannot stay buried forever, and lies always unravel in the end. Vanessa thought she was untouchable, that her web of deception was too strong to be broken. She was wrong. The evidence destroyed them all, just as the title of this confession says. Every single person who participated in that fraud, from Richard Davenport at the top to the accountants and lawyers who helped cover it up, every one of them faced consequences. And my ex-wife, the woman who slept beside me while helping steal billions of dollars, the woman who used our marriage as cover for her crimes, the woman who looked me in the eye and lied to me every single day for years, she is now spending her middle age and old age behind bars, stripped of her wealth and status and freedom. I do not take pleasure in her suffering, but I do take satisfaction in knowing that justice was served, that the truth won, that in the end, the evidence destroyed them all, and I was the one who brought it to light. My name is Marcus Thompson, and this is the story of how my ex-wife helped hide a $6 billion scam, and how I made sure the world found out. The path from betrayal to justice was long and painful, but I would walk it again if I had to. Because some things are worth fighting for, even when the fight costs you everything. And the truth, real and uncompromising and devastating as it may be, is the most powerful weapon of all. I know that now. I learned it the hard way, and I will carry that lesson with me for the rest of my life.